What's up YouTube, Capital G here, giving you guys a quick discussion and analysis on Yashin McNabb's Fairy Tale Gren Maju deck that he took to YCS Portland. I feel like this is still the biggest storyline coming out of YCS Portland, and it's still what a lot of people in the Yu-Gi-Oh community are talking about. Obviously, it was a super obscure deck that, a lot of people, myself included, expected Gren Maju to take a huge leap forward when we got the release of Gizmek Orochi, but I don't think anyone expected it to be, make the finals, for it to be a top 2 deck when it was all said and done at a YCS level event. And it even exceeded Yashin's expectations. He said he never thought that the deck would perform that well, and I think it surprised everybody. But I played against the deck. It's very legitimate, and because just kind of how Yu-Gi-Oh is, the deck is going to be very popular over the next I would say probably month or so. You guys remember when Prank Kids won the YCS, how many players were messing around with that deck? I played on YGO Pro over the weekend. It's definitely something you need to look out for, and if you don't really know what the deck does or you're not familiar with it, you're probably going to get wrecked by it. So I feel like this is something you definitely need to keep an eye out for. So let's go ahead and start talking about the deck, and I think it all kind of starts with the Fairy Tale cards. If you didn't watch the the Grand Championship arc from the original DM anime, you might not have any idea what these cards actually do. I feel like there was obviously a surprise factor, and a lot of its opponents were probably not familiar with these cards. Shout outs to it's Leon Von Schroeder. I almost said Siegfried there. I gotta make sure I get the right Von Schroeder. These cards are absolutely amazing, and the thing about the Fairy Tale archetype is it doesn't really work as an archetype. There are only like 3 real strong cards in the archetype, which are the cards you guys are looking at right here. However, just kind of in a vacuum, all 3 of these cards are incredibly powerful. Obviously, it all starts with the Golden Castle of Stromberg. This is an incredibly strong field spell. It does come obviously at a cost because it makes you banish 10 cards during each one of your standby phases, but in a deck like Gren Maju, that's really not a bad thing because that does just power up your Gren Maju in the same way that something like Pot of Desires does, or even Eater of Millions, when you just banish your entire extra deck. But really, this card, the pros outweigh the cons of it. Number 1, it does allow you to special summon either one of the Fairy Tale monsters straight from your deck. This comes at the cost of your normal summon. However, Gren Maju has always struggled historically with normal summons. If you guys look at some of the powerhouse cards that have been ran throughout the years in Gren Maju, it's always been things like Eater of Millions and also cards like Dino Wrestler Pankratrops, and they've never really had good normal summons. So really, when you're using the effect of Golden Castle, you're basically just I guess you're just giving up Gren Maju for the turn, but you are getting a +2. The reason that I say +2 is because you're not just summoning Hextrude or Phantom Bird, but then these guys also have effects that can pop cards on your opponent's side of the field. Phantom Bird has a built-in MST effect, so it can pop back row, and then Hextrude can pop any card on your opponent's side of the field. Plus, she's a massive beater who can potentially attack twice, and she can progressively get stronger if she runs over a monster by battle, and she starts out at 2600 attack. One of the other great things about this is a blind ghost, or a blind second deck, so when you're summoning these monsters, it's almost like a given that your opponent will have certain or something on the field. Blinding second also means that something like Dino Wrestler Pankratrops makes sense, and really, why would you ever really want to go first with Gren Maju? I know that in the OCG they're playing like Inspector Border to give Gren Maju a decent normal summon outside of Gren Maju, but to me it doesn't make all that much sense because Gren Maju is never going to be able to do anything turn 0 because you can't attack, and I don't think there's enough disruption for Gren Maju to actually warrant going first. Now, one other cool thing about the Golden Castle is it doesn't just serve to summon monsters and get you a +2, but it actually gives you a decent kind of a floodgate effect. So this guy, if you guys don't know, it actually stops your opponent from attacking basically in any form. This card, if your opponent tries to attack while it's on the field, will blow up their monster, and then you'll be able to inflict damage equivalent to that monster's attack on the field. So it definitely serves as basically like a mini floodgate, and your opponent kind of has to answer it. And even when you think that it's progressively kind of draining their deck, keep in mind that the Gren Maju one-shot ability is always there. Now, when you look at some of the rest of this deck, you see some of the usual suspects: Eater of Millions, Gizmek Orochi. Even though this is a fairly new card coming out of Rising Rampage, we already knew that this card was going to be a staple in the Gren Maju deck because it allows them to banish 8 cards immediately, thus powering up this guy. And when you're blinding second, you can still summon this card during your opponent's turn, which is nuts. So generally speaking, if you open with Gizmek Orochi, you can just summon this during the end phase. You get a big 2450 beater, and then you can actually pop a card in your, or you can pop one of your opponent's monsters by just giving up a little bit of your extra deck. But I actually liked him using the dangers. We haven't really seen something like this since, I would say, like the Blue Eyes Danger build, where you see somebody just exclusively running the level 8 dangers. These make a whole lot of sense because these are once again cards that pop cards on the field. If you're blinding second, your opponent will have cards on the field. Ideally, if not, then killing them should be really, really easy. But I think that your opponent's going to have something on the field. So even hypothetically, if your opponent does hit the danger, you're still getting kind of a 1-for-1 because you're just like popping one of their monsters or popping one of their back rows. So it's still perfectly fine. That actually leads me to like the trade-ins in this deck, which makes make a lot of sense because, again, if you're going second, you can trade in a Gizmek Orochi, summon it from the graveyard, or you can actually just trade in your danger cards. You get to draw 2 cards deeper into your deck, and at the same time, you still get the danger effects to pop cards on your opponent's side of the field. Now, he did run 3 copies of Super Poly in the main deck. I thought this was pretty smart. Anytime you're blinding second, Super Poly obviously becomes a lot more valuable against the combo decks of the meta. But the reason that I really like it in this deck is because if you notice, so much of this deck is actually Dark Attribute. I believe that's every single level 8 in this deck, whether it be the Danger Monsters or Gizmek or Hextrude, every single one of them is Dark Attribute. Eater of Millions is Dark Attribute. So ideally what this deck wants to do, it's kind of bum rush the opponent down, summon a bunch of big colossal beaters, 3,000 attack, 2,600 attack, 2,800 attack, 2,600 attack, 2,450 attack. Summon these big beaters, attack your opponent with them, and then use Super Poly to potentially close out the game. Or again, you can just use Super Poly to, I guess, just kind of break your opponent's board if they have one of those big uncrackable boards that doesn't really let you play Yu-Gi-Oh! All that much. Called by the Grave is just kind of like to push your plays through. It also seems like an excellent answer to the Hieratic Link, the Heavenly Spears. I don't think this deck has a great answer for that card specifically. Something like Donarus or Pankatrops is a hard once per turn on the summon, not quite as good as something like Cyber Dragon in that case, but I do feel like Called by the Grave is an excellent answer for this. Now, when I looked at the side deck, and this is how I actually lost when I was playing Altergeist against this deck and testing, there are some floodgates in here, like there can only be one. I see this sometimes with Invoke players. If you run like an Invoke build and you're playing kind of Ghost Seconds, a lot of your typing is kind of all over the place. A lot of hand traps that you're not going to summon. It's the same idea, or it's the same kind of mindset and ideology when it comes to this deck. When you look at the types, the Danger Monsters, they're all over the place. When you look at the Fairy Tail, you got Wing Beast, you have Spellcaster, you have Fiend for Eater of Millions. I think Gren Maju is also a Fiend, but basically your typing is all over the place. This means that if you're going second against an established board, you could potentially break it, or if you're playing against like the Altergeist matchup, you're playing against like Salamangreats and they make you go first, you have a floodgate that you can flip over, and Salamangreats, you basically can't play Yu-Gi-Oh! Altergeist, you get one monster on the field, you can never resolve Multi-Faker, and if that monster isn't something like Miluseek, you're not really doing anything. So this can easily beat a lot of kind of like the control decks of the meta. Eradicator, Epidemic Virus, this one also got me. A lot of these monsters, including ones you can summon straight from the deck like Hextrude, they are Eradicator targets, the dangers as well. And if you're playing against a deck like Sky Striker or Altergeist that are primarily, either one type of card, whether it be trap or spell, I would perfectly be fine with giving up a Hextrude that I summon for free anyways to basically blow out all the spell cards for against Sky Striker and just straight up win the duel. Or the same thing with Altergeist and like their trap cards. So these can definitely just smash the matchups. Also, since you're going second, I think Cyframe Gear Gamma and Fantastical Dragon Phantasme would probably be the only hand traps that I would entertain. I know specifically he said that he wanted hand traps that could not be, or that were not susceptible to something like Called by the Grave. These are my favorite hand traps, Cyframe Gear Gamma, Fantastical Dragon Phantasme, because they're not susceptible to that card. Plus, they're just high impact cards. You know, a lot of times when you resolve Gamma, it can just completely trash a combo player's turn, because it not only negates the effect of the monster, but it destroys it as well. Fantastical Dragon Phantasme is a +1, but this is a very interesting deck. It actually reminds me very much of the decks from the GX era, where this deck obviously looks like it runs out of steam probably about turn 3 or so, because with so many ways of kind of removing cards from your deck, whether it be Gizmak or Golden Castle, Desires, I think you'll probably deck yourself out by about turn 3. But this is a deck that wants to put a lot of offensive pressure on the opponents within the first few turns, and it's definitely a tempo deck. It's definitely a super aggressive deck, and it's a little bit of a cheese deck, because this guy's a cheese card. I would say Super Poly is a cheese card. Even Golden Castle being able to summon Hextrude and do massive damage from that is kind of a cheese, it's a cheese strat as well. But this deck has a lot of power. It can OTK, and it's a legitimate deck. I think that, people are going to be playing it for the next month or so. And even when you do make it go first, there are floodgates and blowout cards that the deck can easily kind of side in and hit the opponent with, that can just instantly win the game. So whatever you guys thought of Yashin McNabb's Gren Maju or Fairy Tail Gren Maju deck, leave it in the comment section below. Have you tried it? Have you played it? Do you like it? Do you hate it? Do you love it? Etc, etc. Thank you guys for watching. As always, subscribe if you have not already, and turn on that notification bell for daily videos.